By the time they dragged Miriam Vale onto the Fredericksburg auction platform in 1859, she had already been sold 11 times. The men in the crowd thought they were watching a difficult woman reach the end of the road. They were wrong. They were watching a woman step into the last room of a house she had been mapping for 24 years. She stood taller than most men there, with broad shoulders, cracked hands, and a face weathered by field work, night travel, and the kind of silence that can outlast cruelty. The auctioneer read her description from a card. 40 years old, strong, plainly built, fit for heavy labor, known to be troublesome. He did not read the one warning every trader whispered after handling her. She remembers too much. That was what frightened them. Not her height, not her strength, not the fact that 3 men had failed to keep her on one plantation for more than a season. It was the way Miriam looked at their ledgers, the way her eyes moved over paper she was never supposed to understand, the way misfortune seemed to follow every owner who signed his name over hers. A barn fire in Caroline County, a banknote called early in Hanover, a missing bill of sale in Richmond, a family account book that no longer balanced. Every man called it bad luck. Miriam called it geography. Because every sale had carried her into another record room, another courthouse habit, another family secret, another weak seam in the paper wall that held human beings in bondage. And that morning, while the crowd measured her arms and teeth and back, Miriam was measuring something else. The distance from the auction platform to the clerk's desk, the seal on the county packet, the name of the man waiting beside the courthouse steps, the last piece of a plan that had begun when she was 12 years old. They thought they had sold Miriam Vale 11 times because she could not be broken. They never understood the truth. She had let them move her. Miriam was born in 1819 on a Tidewater, Virginia plantation called Bellwether, a place of wet fields, rotting tobacco sheds, and white columns that looked clean only from the road. Her mother, Sarah, worked in the laundry yard behind the main house. She boiled sheets until her hands split, mended shirts by rushlight, and kept her voice low even when spoken to like an animal. But Sarah had one possession no master had managed to steal. She could read. Not just the Bible verses white families allowed enslaved people to hear on Sundays, not just names or numbers. Sarah could read letters, ledgers, shipping notices, newspaper columns, and legal advertisements printed in tiny type at the back of old Richmond papers. She had learned from a free black sailor before she was sold inland. He had told her something she repeated to Miriam as if it were scripture. Child, iron can lock a body. Paper locks a life. So Sarah taught Miriam paper. She scratched letters into packed earth after midnight. She traced them with a broken hairpin on the back of firewood. She made Miriam spell words from flour sacks and stolen labels until the girl could turn shapes into sound and sound into meaning. By 6, Miriam could read numbers on wagon tags. By 9, she could copy a signature well enough to fool a sleepy overseer. By 11, she had learned the calendar of the entire plantation from discarded receipts, and she knew which debts were due before the master's own sons did. That was the first terrible thing about knowledge. It did not merely answer questions. It created new ones. Why did one man's name on paper make another person property? Why did a courthouse record weigh more than a mother's tears? Why could a promise spoken by a white man become law, while the pain of the people he owned disappeared without a line? Sarah saw the questions forming in her daughter's face and grew afraid. Learn, she whispered, but never let them see you learning. Miriam obeyed for almost 3 years. Then, one hot afternoon in 1831, she was sent to fetch a blue glass decanter from the master's study. The room was empty. On the desk lay a county plat map, half unrolled, with Bellwether drawn in neat black lines. Fields, roads, creek crossings, boundary marks. Miriam had seen those places all her life, but on paper they became something else. A system, a cage drawn with ink. She leaned over the map, following a wagon road with one finger, and behind her, the master's nephew opened the door. He did not understand at first. A black girl standing at a desk meant nothing. A black girl studying a map meant everything. By dusk, Sarah was tied to the post behind the smokehouse. Every enslaved person on Bellwether was forced to watch. The master did not ask whether Sarah had taught Miriam. He already knew. The punishment was meant to instruct the whole plantation. In Virginia, after the rebellions and scares of those years, white men treated black literacy as a loaded gun. Sarah took the lashes without begging. Miriam tried to run to her. Two women held her back, not because they lacked pity, but because they knew a child thrown toward that post would only give the overseer another target. By morning, Sarah was gone. Sold to a rice dealer headed south, still feverish, still bleeding through the cloth tied around her back. Miriam was not allowed to touch her hand, not allowed to ask where she was being taken, not allowed to say goodbye. She watched the wagon shrink into the dust until the road swallowed it. Something in Miriam ended there, but something else began. She stopped crying before noon. That evening, she picked up a burned stick from the cooking fire and wrote one sentence under her sleeping board. They took her with paper. I will answer with paper. For the next 6 years, Miriam became almost invisible. She bent her back in the fields. She carried water without complaint. She lowered her eyes when spoken to. And she listened. She listened to overseers talk about prices, to sons complain about mortgages, to house servants repeat arguments from behind parlor doors, to visiting planters curse banks, lawyers, crop failures, and wives. Bellwether looked powerful from the outside, but inside, its books were sick. The master had mortgaged 2 harvests before they were planted. He had pledged enslaved workers as collateral on a mill investment. He had borrowed against land he did not fully own. Miriam did not have to steal the records to understand them. She only had to stand near the doorway when the bookkeeper read them aloud. By 17, she knew the master's weakness better than his banker did. 3 missed quarterly notes would allow seizure of the plantation's movable property. People were movable property. That phrase lodged in her mind like a hook. For a time, Miriam wanted to ruin Bellwether immediately. Burn the barns, spook the horses, hide the account books, let the bank devour the family that had devoured hers. But rage, she learned, was not the same as strategy. If Bellwether collapsed too soon, the people she knew would be scattered south in panic sales. Children would vanish. Husbands and wives would be split. Her own path would end in some sugar field where information traveled slower than death. So Miriam made a colder decision. She needed movement. Not escape, movement. A person trapped on one plantation knew one master, one road, one set of habits. A person sold across counties could learn the whole machine. And if the machine was made of paper, she needed to see where that paper was kept. Her first sale came in 1837. She arranged it without anyone realizing there had been an arrangement. The overseer's wife already believed half the women on Bellwether were conspiring against her marriage. Miriam fed that fear with scraps of truth, misplaced handkerchiefs, overheard whispers, and one folded note written in the overseer's own clumsy phrases. Then Miriam made herself inconvenient, not rebellious enough to hang, not violent enough to jail, just strange enough. She corrected a tally under her breath. She predicted a debt collector's visit 2 days before it happened. She stared too long at sealed letters. Within a month, the master called her unnatural. Within 6 weeks, he sold her. The buyer was Josiah Harrow, a widowed planter in Spotsylvania County who owned 2 things Miriam wanted: a failing tobacco farm and a private shelf of Virginia statutes. For 11 months, Miriam worked his fields by day and read his law books by stolen candle at night. She learned that the law of slavery was not a single wall. It was a leaning fence patched by fear, custom, contradictions, and men too arrogant to imagine the people under it could read. Some wills promised freedom and were ignored. Some sales were recorded twice with different names. Some children were listed under mothers who had already been sold. Some manumission papers failed because a clerk missed a seal. Some succeeded because nobody noticed until it was too late. That was Miriam's first discovery. The system looked permanent because everyone obeyed its handwriting, but the handwriting was messy. Her second sale took her to a trader named Abner Pike. He meant to move her south with a coffle of 23 people. Miriam had already learned that Pike could not read. He carried letters in a brass tube and pretended to inspect them, but he always waited for tavern clerks to speak the contents aloud. On the third night of the road, Miriam slipped one wrist from an iron cuff rubbed loose with grease and ash. She crossed to the fire where Pike slept with a knife under his coat. She took the knife first. Then she woke him with the blade resting against his cheek. "You are going to sell me in Richmond," she said, "not farther south." His mouth opened. No sound came out. "You are going to tell the buyer I am strong, dull, and fit for laundry work. And if you do not, I will tell every man from here to Petersburg that Abner Pike marks his contracts with pictures because letters beat him." The trader stared at her as if the night itself had spoken. By sunrise, she was chained again. By the next week, she was in Richmond, and Miriam had learned something more valuable than Pike's secret. She had learned that men who called themselves masters were often mastered by shame. In Richmond, she was bought by a lawyer planter named Edwin Tarl. Tarl had no great plantation, but he handled estates for men who did. His office smelled of ink, tobacco, and damp wool. Enslaved workers moved in and out carrying files, coal buckets, folded correspondence, and boxes from the courthouse. To Tarl, Miriam was a large, quiet woman useful for lifting. To Miriam, Tarl's office was a door into the kingdom. For 2 years she memorized names: executors, heirs, clerks, witnesses, appraisers, sheriffs, slave traders, judges. She learned how estates were inventoried, how people were valued by age and skill, how families were split by neat columns on cream paper. She saw a boy listed as Tom, defective left hand, reduced price. A woman marked Millie and infant, sell together if convenient. A carpenter valued higher than his wife and 3 children combined. The cruelty was not hidden in the records. It was organized. Miriam hated the papers. Then she learned to use them. In Tarl's office, she found an old chancery file from 1814, brittle with age, tied in blue ribbon. The case concerned a man promised freedom in a private agreement, then sold before the promise was fulfilled. The new owner tried to deny it. The court had ruled that a witnessed promise could follow the person. Not always, not cleanly, not safely, but enough. Enough to become a crack. Miriam read that file until she could recite every line of the clerk's summary. A promise on paper could become a weapon. A signature could be made to turn around and bite the hand that wrote it. But one case could not free anyone by itself. She needed witnesses. She needed carriers. She needed men outside slavery's reach who could file papers in court. She needed enslaved people on the inside who could move information without leaving fingerprints. She needed a network. So she began building one. Not with speeches. Speeches got people killed. Miriam built with water buckets, laundry marks, hymn changes, broom positions, and knots tied into apron strings. A blue thread on a fence meant a patrol had passed. A cracked gourd by a well meant a message was waiting. A hymn started on the second verse meant danger. 3 folded corners on a scrap meant the paper had to reach a free person. By the time Tarl sold her to cover a gambling debt, Miriam had trained 9 people to pass information across Richmond without speaking her name. Her 4th and 5th sails took her through Hanover and Louisa. At each stop she gathered something different: a map of patrol routes, a bank officer's mistress, a clerk who could be bribed with tobacco, a free black carpenter with cousins in Philadelphia, a midwife who visited 5 plantations and heard every secret before dawn. By 1846, Miriam's name had become a superstition among traders. Some said tools broke after she touched them. Some said horses refused roads she had walked. Some said a man who bought her would find his debts spoken aloud in church. Miriam encouraged the rumors. Superstition was useful. It made white men explain what fear would not let them admit. They were not afraid she could curse them. They were afraid she could see them. Then came Caleb Marr. Marr owned Ash Creek, a wheat and tobacco estate on the edge of Caroline County. He was younger than the other men, colder, and not foolish. He had heard the rumors before buying Miriam. He did not believe in curses. He believed in surveillance. He set boys to watch her. He moved her away from housework. He searched her sleeping place twice a week. He placed marked paper near her path to see if she would react. For the first time in years, Miriam could not read freely. She had to become smaller than her own mind. She broke tools on purpose, miscounted sacks, pretended not to know left from right when letters were carved on bins, laughed at the wrong moments, let them believe her size had swallowed her sense. It nearly destroyed her, because every day she spent playing ignorant felt like a second theft. One night, an old man named Reuben was caught with a page from a spelling primer hidden under his shirt. Marr blamed Miriam. Reuben had never met her alone. It did not matter. Marr wanted a confession, and he knew pain could make one. They beat Reuben in the wash yard until his breathing sounded wet. Miriam stood with the others, face empty, hands folded. Inside, she was breaking. If Reuben spoke her name, the network might unravel. If he did not, he might die for a lie. At dawn, Marr sent for Miriam. His study was bright and clean. A Bible lay open on the desk beside a pistol and a folded confession. "I know what you are," he said. Miriam looked at the floor. "I know you read. I know you teach. I know you have made fools of better men than me." He unfolded the paper. "Reuben says you gave him the lesson." Miriam lifted her eyes. For the first time since arriving at Ash Creek, she let Caleb Marr see her. Not all of her, just enough. "You wrote that confession yourself," she said. The room went still. Marr's hand moved toward the pistol. Miriam did not move. "And you wrote it badly. Reuben would not say instructional material. He would say book." Marr's face changed. A clever man hearing a locked door open behind him. Miriam continued. "You owe the Merchants Bank $8,000. You signed your brother's name on the renewal. Your wife's dowry land was never yours to pledge. And the sheriff already suspects you altered the survey line by Mill Creek." His finger stopped above the pistol. "How do you know that?" Because you keep your sins in the same drawer as your debts. Mar stared at her a long time. Then Miriam gave him the choice she had prepared for months. Sell her quietly to the buyer named on a slip she placed on his desk, and the secret stayed buried. Keep her, and 3 letters would leave Ash Creek before sunset. 1 to the bank, 1 to his brother, 1 to the sheriff. By noon the next day, Miriam was sold again. Reuben lived, and Caleb Marr spent the rest of his life telling people the woman was a devil, because that was easier than admitting she had read him like a ledger. The 6th sale carried Miriam exactly where she wanted to go, back toward Bellwether. Not the plantation itself, not yet, but into the circle of the family that had taken her mother. The Bellwether property had passed from the old master to his son-in-law, Lucian Creed, a man with polished boots, delicate hands, and violent ambitions. Creed was building an empire. He bought farms before he had paid for the last ones. He used enslaved people as collateral across 5 counties. He made political donations he could not afford. He collected signed papers like other men collected silver. That made him dangerous. It also made him vulnerable, because a large lie needs more records than a small one. Miriam reached him through his cousin's farm, then through a trader, then through a woman in his laundry house who knew how to fold messages into shirt cuffs. Her 7th sale placed her on a Creed property called North Bend. Her 8th moved her to Mill Vale. Her 9th put her in the kitchens at Creed's main house for 1 winter. By then, the network had spread far beyond anything Miriam imagined as a child. 46 plantations in Virginia and Maryland, 13 free black couriers, 7 church basements used as message drops, 3 white clerks who did not know they were helping her because greed can be handled like a tool. Miriam did not trust most people with the full plan. No one carried the whole map but her. That was the safest way. A woman in Louisa knew only the bank dates. A blacksmith in Hanover knew only the seal pattern. A free barber in Richmond knew only which envelope to deliver. A preacher's wife knew only which hymn meant hold the message until dark. The plan was not a rebellion with torches. It was a slow hand reaching into the drawer where the empire kept its proof. Then, in 1853, Lucian Creed made the mistake Miriam had been waiting for. He decided to centralize his records. His holdings had grown too tangled for even his lawyers to follow. Insurance papers did not match purchase records. Birth registers were missing. Estate transfers contradicted bills of sale. 2 banks claimed collateral over some of the same people. Creed ordered every plantation ledger, bill of sale, labor list, tax receipt, and slave register brought to Bellwether. Bellwether. The place where Miriam's mother had been taken. The place where the first sentence of her war had been written under a sleeping board. Miriam arranged her 10th sale into Bellwether by making herself useful to Creed's household manager, a man with a bad knee and a worse memory. By autumn, she was carrying boxes into the old study. The map room was still there. The post behind the smokehouse was gone, but the road remained. On her first night back, Miriam walked to the edge of the quarters and looked toward the southern road. She did not speak aloud. Some promises are too old for sound. For 4 months, Bellwether became a factory of paper. Clerks came from Richmond. Lawyers visited twice a week. Boxes arrived sealed with wax. Names were copied into master registers. Miriam carried ink, lifted ledgers, swept floors, poured water, fed fires. And each night, after the lamps went out, she repaired the world. Not with one forgery, with hundreds of careful corrections. a birth year changed to match a promised age, a missing mother's name restored, a sale date adjusted so a prior agreement could not be erased, a witness signature inserted from a man safely dead, a manumission clause copied in the exact dry language of county law. She did not invent freedom from nothing. That would be too easy to destroy. She built confusion around truths slavery had already tried to bury, promises made to quiet a dying woman, verbal bargains written in margins, children born to women who had once been listed as hired, not sold, transfers executed before debts were legally settled, and at the center, she placed the blade. A bound packet of agreements dated across 17 years, each bearing Lucian Creed's signature, each naming groups of enslaved workers as entitled to freedom after faithful service rendered under pledged consideration. The language was dull. That was the beauty of it. No righteous thunder, no declaration. Just the kind of legal mud rich men created all the time and expected poor people to drown in. Miriam forged Creed's hand perfectly because she had studied it for years. She matched paper stock stolen from an unused bundle. She mixed ink with soot and iron gall until it aged right. She pressed folds where folds should be. She used dead witnesses from old estate files. But documents alone were not enough. A paper weapon needs a hand brave enough to carry it into court. That hand belonged to Isaiah Boone. Isaiah was a free black copyist in Richmond who had once worked in a law office until a white clerk accused him of insolence for correcting a date. He was careful, bitter, and brilliant. Miriam had saved his sister from being sold south by altering one transport list in 1848. He had never forgotten. On February 12, 1857, Isaiah Boone entered the Caroline County Courthouse with a petition under his coat. He filed on behalf of 619 people claimed by Lucian Creed. The petition said those people were not property. It said they were being unlawfully held after written agreements of freedom had matured. It named dates, it named witnesses, it named papers, and it attached copies from Creed's own consolidated registry. The courthouse clerk laughed when he first read it. Then he stopped laughing, because the seals looked right. The signatures looked right. The registry references matched the index Creed's lawyers had just submitted. Within 3 days, Lucian Creed was summoned. Within a week, 2 banks froze his credit. Within a month, every family that had invested with him began asking whether their collateral was real. That was when the empire began to sound hollow. Creed stormed into the courthouse claiming fraud. But to prove fraud, he had to prove his own records were unreliable. If his records were unreliable, the banks could challenge his loans. If the banks challenged his loans, his plantations could be seized. If his plantations were seized, every hidden contradiction would be dragged into daylight. He had built his house on paper. Miriam had not burned it. She had made the foundation read itself aloud. The hearings lasted almost 2 years. Some of the documents were challenged. Some were thrown out. Some survived. People whispered that a conspiracy was at work. They were right. They simply kept looking in the wrong direction. They looked for abolitionist lawyers from the North. They looked for angry white rivals. They looked for churchmen, politicians, radicals, anyone who fit their idea of an enemy. They did not look at the tall black woman carrying wood outside the hearing room. They did not look at the women washing sheets behind Bellwether. They did not look at the blacksmith repairing wheel rims by the courthouse alley. They did not look at the old midwife humming the second verse of a hymn. That was Miriam's protection. The system could imagine black suffering. It could imagine black labor. It could imagine black violence when fear needed a shape. But it could not imagine black administration. It could not imagine that the people it reduced to marks and ledgers had learned the ledgers better than the men who owned them. In July of 1858, the preliminary ruling came down. Not all 619 were granted relief. The court carved, delayed, and narrowed, protecting the institution wherever it could. But 274 names were recognized as having enforceable claims. 274 people were ordered released from Creed's ownership pending final bond arrangements. It was not enough. It was a miracle. It was not a miracle at all. It was 24 years of memory sharpening itself against paper. On the day the first group walked out, Miriam stood behind the laundry house and watched. A mother held two children by the wrists so tightly they cried. A cooper carried his tools in a sack. An old woman stepped through the gate and touched the outside post, as if testing whether the air beyond it would strike her dead. No music played. No crowd cheered. No white man admitted defeat. Freedom arrived like a door opened quietly before dawn, and still it opened. Lucian Creed never recovered. He spent his money on lawyers, detectives, clerks, and handwriting experts. He accused banks, rivals, servants, abolitionists, and eventually his own relatives. The more he fought, the more records surfaced. A second petition followed the first, then a third, then smaller suits in neighboring counties using pieces of the same logic. By the end of 1860, 403 people connected to Creed's holdings had obtained freedom, bonded status, sale reversals, or removal from disputed ownership. Not all were safe. Not all stayed together. Not all lived long enough to see the war that came roaring across Virginia soon after. Miriam knew better than to turn victory into fantasy. Paper could open a door. It could not make the road gentle. Her 11th sale was supposed to be punishment. Creed, half ruined and half mad, ordered her sold out of state after hearing a servant repeat that Miriam had once worked in every place where the bad papers began. But by then, the network was no longer only hers. The trader who bought her received the wrong travel papers. The sheriff who inspected the coffle was delayed by a forged complaint. A wheel broke on the wagon road at a bend where two men were waiting with fresh horses. By dawn, Miriam Vale had disappeared. Some said she reached Philadelphia. Some said she crossed into Canada. Some said she returned during the war to guide Union officers through back roads she had memorized as a girl. Some said she lived quietly under another name, teaching black children to read from the same kind of burned stick her mother once used in the dirt. There is no signed memoir, no portrait, no grave that can be proved. That is not strange. A woman who spent her life learning the danger of records would know exactly how to leave the wrong ones behind. But the people she helped remembered. They remembered the laundry marks, the hymn codes, the cracked gourd beside the well, the tall woman who could look at a folded contract and tell whether a family would be split by Christmas. In 1891, long after slavery had been destroyed by war and law, a group of elderly men and women gathered near the old Bellwether Road. They placed a small stone where the quarters had once stood. No full name was carved there, only 3 short lines. She read the chain, she found the tear, she opened the road. Below the words, someone carved a mark from Miriam's network. A broken square with one corner lifted. It meant the way is not safe, but it is possible. That was Miriam Vale's legacy. Not that she was sold 11 times. Not that she frightened traders. Not that one planter lost his empire trying to prove papers he had signed could not be trusted. Her legacy was more dangerous than that. She proved that slavery's power was not only in the whip, the gun, the auction block, or the patrol. It was in the document, the bill of sale, the registry, the note, the seal. The line where a human name became an asset. And if the chain was written, then someone could learn to read it. If it was filed, someone could find it. If it was copied, someone could copy it differently. If it rested on memory, then a woman with a stolen education could remember better than every man who claimed to own her. They built the chain out of paper. Miriam Vale found where paper tears.